Oh, it's working.
So welcome again to the Conversation Café. Today, we're going to explore a Métis journey through religion to relations, and our guest is Paul Gareau. And I'll introduce Paul in a couple of minutes, but I do want to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University, where the MFSC, the host institution, is located on unceded Indigenous lands. And the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tchagé, Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. So welcome to this place. And I want to acknowledge too that we have a great group today from all over the country. And so I know that Paul, you're in Treaty 6 territory, and maybe we'll hear more about that. But I just would like to say, as people introduce themselves, if you know where you're located, either in settler terminology or in terms of treaty or unceded lands, I invite you just to say your name and where you are. And if you don't know, that's totally fine. But I also encourage you to look that up. So I'll start and then I'll pass it on. So I'm Ellie Hummel and I am also on Kanien'kehá:ka territory, just outside of Montreal in the suburbs. And I'll pass it on to Belinda.
Hi, my name's Belinda. I'm located in Greenfield Park, which is on the south shore of Montreal. So I guess I'm also Tchagé. I'm imagining it probably spreads quite a vast area, so that's where I am today. And I'm going to pass it on to Sai.
Thank you, Belinda. Hey everyone, my name is Sai. I'm a master's student at Concordia University, and I live in the neighborhood Verdun, and yeah, I think it is unceded territory, but I don't want to pronounce the name wrongly, so I'm gonna refrain. But and I'd like to pass it on to Ashley.
Hello, I'm Ashley. I'm the interfaith facilitator at the MFSC, and I'm also located in Tchagé. I live in the sub part of Montreal. And I will pass it on to Ellen.
Hi, I'm Ellen. I'm in Dawson Creek, British Columbia, northeastern BC, which is located on Treaty 8 territory, traditional territory of the Daneza and other Indigenous groups, including Cree and Métis, which is where my grandma comes from. Yeah. Oh, right. And now I choose someone to pass on to, right?
Correct.
Let's hear from Rupert.
Hello, yeah, I'm Rupert. I'm also in Montreal. I'm originally from British Columbia as well, but been here for a while. But yeah, that's all I'll say. And who has it? I'll pass it on to Brian.
Hey, I'm Brian. I'm also in Montreal, which is Tchagé, I believe. It's my first time saying that. Gotta learn how to pronounce it properly. And I'll pass it on to Laura.
Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Gallo. Interesting factoid, I used to work at MFSC and spent a great portion of my life at Concordia. Hi, Paul.
Yay!
Paul and I did our masters together, so this is really cool. Anyway, I'm in Gatineau today, which I believe is on Anishinaabe territory. And I'll pass it over to Amber. I don't know if Amber already went. Sorry.
Hey,
she did.
Okay. Sorry, frog in my throat. I am from Amiskwaci, Wisconsin, which is Beaver Hills House, also known as Edmonton. And I am the historian laureate of the city of Edmonton. And I'm very happy to be here for Dr. Paul Gareau's talk. Thanks for inviting me. Thank you.
Merci, boy.
Terrific, Amber. And you get to pass it on. Maybe raise your hand if you haven't gone.
And Bob and yeah.
I see people. There we go. Passing it on to Bob.
Bob, I'm in Montreal. I'll take a shot at that name that you referred to, Elia Ganengahaga, something like that.
I'm not the expert. You can go on the Concordia website and you can actually hear it pronounced by.
Okay. My understanding is that historically it's in the Iroquois Mohawk end of the world. Certainly the reserve to the south of us is Mohawk. And Concordia grad, long time ago.
Great, glad to hear, Bob, and you get to pass it on.
Renee.
Okay. Hi, I'm Renee Tuga, and I live in Montreal. I'm sorry, I don't know the traditional territorial name or how to pronounce it right now. I started Googling, but I'm like, no, I just want to be here.
Don't do that.
Not a competition, don't worry, it's all good.
Well, you're late, and I'm supposed to know this, but interestingly, I graduated from the U of A. I grew up in Alberta, and I graduated from the U of A many years ago, did my undergrad there, and I'm starting graduate studies in the winter at Concordia. So I like this kind of back to Alberta and the U of A. So
terrific.
And I'm not sure who hasn't gone. Mark, have you gone yet? I'll pass it to Mark. I thought I saw
Miyokio?
No, that's me.
Twice.
Yeah, no, that's I. Sorry, just the video was too much for the computer. My name's Mark, also in Montreal, and I shall pass it on to Miyokio.
Hi there, I'm in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, and I used to be a Buddhist chaplain at Concordia a long time ago, starting in 1998, I think, for a lot of years. And also, I just finished the Indigenous Canada course with my sister, and it was so great, I have to say. Thank you, Paul.
Awesome. Welcome, Yoko. It's really great to see you here.
Yeah,
and Candace, great. Candace and Suzanne haven't gone yet. So Miyoko, you'll get to pass it to one of them.
Oh, yes. So I'm sorry. Candace, please. Yeah. Oops.
Hi, I'm Candace. So I'm also pronunciation challenged right now. The reason I'm here is that my husband, Dennis, is a specialist in Indigenous studies. He works at McGill in psychology. So through him and things we do as a family, I try to participate in all the ways I can to learn about Indigenous cultures and experiences, and it's really a joy in my life. So I'm happy to be here.
Welcome. And you get to pass it to Suzanne.
Here I am. I am Suzanne Wilkinson. I am Nehea from Northern Alberta. I was born in Treaty 6, but I come from Treaty 8 territory. I currently live in Lekwungen and Wasanich territories, which is the south end of Vancouver Island. And our territory here is actually ceded. The local nations have a beautiful ongoing working relationship with the provincial government. And so we don't say that we're on unceded territory here because that would undermine that beautiful working relationship. But there are loads of unceded territories all across the land. So it's good to know where you are and who the Indigenous people are where you are and the history of your location. And I would encourage everybody to use all your courage to learn to pronounce the names. Your name for you is important. So just like that, the names of the local places are important too. And it's okay to make mistakes, and that's how we learn, right? We all have a tie into education, and so nobody's born knowing how to say this stuff. So I would just encourage you to get out there and give it your best shot, and it's okay to learn over a few efforts. Thank you.
Love it, Suzanne. Thank you.
Hi.
And Brittany, welcome. We just introduced ourselves, so if you want to say who you are, and we all said where we were on which Indigenous territory, Indigenous land. So if you know it, that's great. If not, it's judgment free. And many of us didn't know how to pronounce it. So don't worry. Tell us your name and where you are.
Hello, my name is Brittany. I am coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, Misquochi, which is Edmonton. And yeah, I thought this would be a fantastic conversation to join in. I work at Fort Edmonton Park, and I am also Métis. So anytime I can have these creative conversations, I'm always really excited to join.
Awesome.
Nice. Right on.
Welcome, Brittany. And welcome, Josh, too. So the last one, as other folks come in. So Josh, do you want to say your name and where you are located? Josh is not there. So why don't we—
Hi, my name's Josh.
Perfect.
Montreal.
Yeah, Montreal, wonderful. Welcome. So I'm glad you've all come. It's great to see so many of you, and great. There's a bit of a reunion of former Concordia staff and students. So I'm really pleased. And in that line, I'd like to welcome Dr. Paul Gareau, who I met many years ago when he was a student at Concordia. And actually, I hope I may say this, hung out at the MFSC and was one of our student staff back then. And I've sort of been keeping in touch with Paul, and most recently got connected again because I heard that, Paul, you were the staff lead on the Indigenous Canada course, and then sort of started to learn more about the things you've been doing. And that's what today's cafe is about. And I'm personally really interested and really, really pleased that you've agreed to come, because I remember when you were a student, you'd often sort of mention that you mentioned you were from Saskatchewan, which of course spoke to me because I spent much time there. But you also there's a connection there. But you also mentioned that you were Métis, but it was always sort of an aside. And now it's really been, you've done a lot of work since then. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing it. So I'm over to you, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you. I know you've spent time in Saskatchewan because you say it like it's pronounced Saskatchewan. It's really amazing. So thank you, Ellie. Tansei, bonjour, everybody. And my name is Dr. Paul Gareau. I'm from Batoche, Saskatchewan. And I'll get into my PowerPoint, which is, I don't know if it's long or not. How much time do I have, Ellie?
We have till 3.
Till 3. Oh, MST.
That's till 1 would be you. 1:15, something like that. Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm very happy to see so many of you here, and I'm especially honored to see Indigenous folks here too, like Suzanne, Amber, and Brittany. I'm very happy that you're here, and Ellen, just to be giving me your time and attention to this presentation, which is I don't know how to present to normal people. I don't know how to do. I'm just so in academics all the time that I just don't know how to present. Like it's just always a PowerPoint presentation, and I don't know how to have a conversation. I don't know how to talk to be, I don't know who else feels this way. So I'm Métis. I'm from Batoche, Saskatchewan. I've been in the Faculty of Native Studies as a assistant professor since 2016. And I'll give you my credentials later, but I don't know how to do this. So I have this kind of 20-slide presentation that unpacks who the Métis are and how I've kind of journeyed through religion. So as Ellie said, I started my university at Concordia because I ended up falling in love with someone from Toronto, and we couldn't live in Toronto because it's too expensive. So we moved in 2000 to Montreal, which is amazing. It's like my heart place. I love that city, and I still have strong connections, and I'm so happy I still have a strong connection with Ellie. So I did my BA from 2002 to 2006 at Concordia, and I was a peer supporter. I was a peer support supervisor for a year, and I spent a lot of my undergrad at the chaplaincy. So it was called chaplaincy back then. So I don't know what it changed to. Is that it changed? Right? It changed names, right? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Multi-faith Spirituality Center.
Yeah, that's right. And I did my MA with Laura, which is really amazing to see you here. So thank you so much. It's so awesome. It's so weird to come back, right? So let me just run to it. And just, I guess you guys can watch this. It'll be recorded. I can also send you these PowerPoints in a PDF so that you can see it, because being Métis and defining who Métis is in a settler colonial framework or in a settler colonial country like Canada is very difficult. So it's I know that Amber for sure does amazing work as a Métis historian and engaging her Métis community in and around Lac Saint Anne and stuff, and I'll be touching a bit about that. But it's just that it's a very difficult topic for people to understand, especially in Eastern Canada, because when I was in Montreal forever, in Ottawa forever, it was hard to say that I was Métis because of all of the baggage that comes with being Métis in Eastern Canada, right? So speaking specifically about the resistances of 69, 70, and the Batoche resistance where I'm from in 1885, where Eastern Canada from Lower and Upper Canada seen the Métis in very possessive ways, right? So it was never about affirming Métis peoplehood. It was always about possessing who the Métis were, right? So it was always a dangerous place and I'm saying this now, it was a dangerous place to assert Métis identity because it was always misunderstood. And this is what this presentation is about, is to unpack what my journey is and its relationship to that. But since 2016, I am in Métis homeland and I'm surrounded by Métis people, and my boss is from my neighborhood, essentially from Prince Albert. And it's just like, there's so much support, right? So I feel very, very privileged to be I have a bunny hug too, a Faculty of Native Studies thing. So like, I'm very happy and very proud to be part of this institution, right? So, Matthew's here. Did Matthew want to present himself, or?
Let's just keep going. It's all right.
Okay.
But
cool.
Welcome, Matthew. Really glad you joined.
Welcome, Matthew.
And George Ryder joined us too. So. Right
on. Okay, here I go. So buckle in, everyone. This is going to be a ride, boy. Good. So again, my topic today is called Métis, a journey through religion to relations, really. And I'm really happy to be here, and thank you, Helly, for inviting me. I feel really honored, especially when Concordia was such a huge part of my growing up, right? I had to grow up there in order to be who I am today. So I'm very happy to be here. So first of all, like we all did, acknowledge the territories that we live in and that we work in and that we love in. I like the idea of putting love in that because Indigenous people love to love, which is really fun. Laugh and love, holy. So I am coming from the University of Alberta, which is on Treaty 6 territory, which is a really important, it's a territory that I grew up in Saskatchewan. It crosses both borders, signatories to Cree, Dene, Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, like a lot of different First Nation signatories to Treaty 6, which is fantastic. And here's the flag if you don't know what it looks like. It's really awesome. But I'm also in Métis homeland territory, and I'll show you a map later on. Métis homeland encompasses all the prairies and parklands, but we are in region 4 of the Métis Nation of Alberta, right? So this is where Edmonton is. So Edmonton, Amiskwaciwâskahikan, which has been mentioned a few times. So Beaver Hills House. And then Concordia University, acknowledging that you're in Kanien'kehá:ka territory, unceded territory, a hub for so many Indigenous peoples, especially the Inuit, right? So Inuit coming to Montreal, Ottawa, Alberta, and Edmonton. These are important Inuit spaces, and sometimes we don't mention it, right? So let me start this discussion about religion and Métis with a beautiful passage from Marilyn Dumont, who is an amazing Métis poet here in Amiskwaciwâskahikan. So give me a second here. So Marilyn, so I'm going to read it for you just because it's like a prayer, right? So Marilyn, the breed women. The breed women who raised me could step dance all night and still go to mass the next morning. The breed women who raised me used scrub boards and flat irons, snare rabbits, smoke roll your owns, and knew that Sally Ann wasn't a designer label. The breed women who raised me were midwives and doctors, finished grade 6, survived residential schools, and scrubbed everything with bleach. The breed women who raised me raised many others, hung rosaries by their beds, covered their heads in church, prayed to St. Anne, used holy water, made the signs of the cross, and cut the clouds, and saw the spirits of dead relatives and ancestors visit them at Lac St. Anne. So this, Marilyn is a Métis woman, a really amazing poet from here in Edmonton in Alberta. Her family grew up on a road allowance, so it's like a Métis community near Sundre, near Calgary. And this poem here really sort of speaks to the character of Métis religiosity and Métis experiences of religion as it links to our collective identity and our collective experience, right? So it's a beautiful poem, and I love reading it. It was a photo taken, I didn't even describe it, it was a photo taken at an exhibit in Red Deer, which is really amazing, right? So presenting Métis presence in Red Deer is also an incredible thing, right? But this really speaks to Métis religion, and what does that mean, right? So let's unpack a little bit of what the questions are, right? And this is the theme of this talk as quickly as I can do it. Being religious, what it means to be a good Catholic. We're talking about rosaries. We're talking about Métis bad Catholics, which is something really fun to think about. We're talking about Native spirituality, this idea of forbidden paganness. Like all of these aspects kind of play into what we understand or what we try to perceive or impose on what it means to be Métis, right? So who are the Métis, right? So we have a few pictures here of this sort of typical understanding of what it means to be Métis. Does it mean to be mixed, right? And mixed bloods, right? Which is a mixed up kind of idea, right? And we have this idea that the white man came into Rupert's land, and then like Indigenous First Nation woman married a voyageur in this really cute little vest, these little things, and then this melding of cultures, right? Or of white and brown mixed Métis, right? So this is something that we have in the back of our minds constantly when it comes to understanding Métis. We also have this idea of this Heritage Minute done by Roy Dupree, who's a famous Quebecois actor, presenting himself as Louis Riel, right? But he is not Métis. He's an actor from Quebec. So what does that speak to how we project on what it means to be Métis? And this sort of romantic primitivist idea of the First Nations daughter being given to a white male, So these are all the narratives that are in the background of what it means to be Métis, right? This idea of race and this orientation towards whiteness. And these are the things that as Métis, we're constantly trying to unpack and try to resist, right? This naturalization of settler indigenization, this romanticization of what it means to be Métis, that white people came into indigeneity and became part of the land, right? And settled more than settlerness, right? This idea of syncretic culture, assimilation, and degradation, right? So for me, all of these aspects are part of a racial understanding of what it means to be Métis. That's something that us as scholars of Métis in Métis studies in Faculty of Native Studies are actively, trying to unpack and resist, right? Because it becomes this sort of objectification of what it means to be Métis, rather than seeing and affirming our peoplehood or nationhood, our collective political sides, right? And this is kind of the idea of what Métis and the experience of Métis religion is about, right? So here's my working definition of Métis that really helps kind of cut through a lot of the sort of racialization, is that the Métis are a post-contact Indigenous people defined by Indigenous title to land, extended kinship relations, and a broad sense of mobility, right? So there's my definition. We could come back to it. So the Métis homeland really is this space here, going up into the north. But we have Red River here. We have the medicine line between both Canada and the US. But we have also hunting and wintering sites all over in the Cypress Hills, in the Calgary, lower sort of Blackfoot, Siksika, Confederacy country, and then up into Edmonton and St. Albert area, right? So this is really the way Chris Anderson, my boss, talks about it, is that it's like a heart pumping between Red River and Edmonton. These are really important parts of what it means to be Métis, right? This Métis geography. And I'm from this really important node, right? So I'm from Batoche, Saint Laurent, Prince Albert area, right? So I'm from this little French-Canadian village here that is next to Batoche, Saskatchewan. And here we have Wanero First Nation, and then St. Louis, and then this is the the Duck Lake here, and then Prince Albert is up here on the 11, and Saint Laurent de Grandin, which is a really important pilgrimage site for me, right? So I grew up in this really Métis geography that was really cohesive to a point where after the resistance of 1895, where the Canadian government sent troops to dispossess Métis of our power and our place, our sort of collective, engagement with the land was very much fragmented, right? Fragmented by racism and by like a racialization, right? Between what it means to be white settler, First Nation Cree, and then what it means to be Métis, this in-between thing, right? This is that projection. And for me, this place, as I was living in Montreal, I was dying to go home, dying to go back home and do the work and understand my family history and understand the broader collective part of what it means to be Métis, right? So this is the South Saskatchewan River that runs through Batoche and runs through my heart, I guess you can say, because this river is just beautiful to me, right? It's part of our homeland and where we're from, right? So just to give you a little sort of insight into who I am and where I'm from. So this is my grandmother, Harriet Bremner, who was born in the fur trade and was a really, a big part of our family dynamic, but a person that we never saw. And this picture came to me just lately in the last few months, and it is astounding. I look at her and I see my cousins, and it's just amazing to see your ancestors, in photographic representation. So this is my grandmother Alexandrine Jobin's grandmother, right? And this is my father Remy, and then all of his brothers and sisters. So we are Gareaus, but we are Jobins and Bremners and Taylors. And then my family married Bouchers and McDougall, so marrying into this Métis space, right? So Métis family names are really important. For me, what does it mean to be Métis? It's the resistance of Gabriel. We have here Gabriel Dumont and the resistance in Batoche, where we were fighting off like an invasion force of settler Canadians, right? And this is something that is still part of our way of being, an important part of who I am, right? We love the fiddle as Métis. We love it to death. It's like one of our favorite relatives is this fiddle. We are very connected to flower beading motifs, and we are the flower people of the prairies. We have, it's amazing how much beading there is out in Métis land, Métis homeland, and my connection to horses. My father raced these kinds of chariot horses his whole life, and my uncle Jill here and his sons still race chuck-wagon chariots. So our relationship to horses is deep, and I think with any Métis person, you can talk to them about horses, they'll like salivate. They'll like swoon a little bit. They'll be like, yeah, baby. Also, like my connection to the political community here in Edmonton. This is Mika Taylor, a long lost cousin, and her husband. This is us at a Métis event, which is really fun. The Belcourt Brasso Awards. So my coming back home and reconnecting with my collective, it's not just about me. It's about my collective family, the people that I'm making relations with, right? And then my own family, right? So this is my wife, Lucy, and this is my son, Edmund, and then this is my son, Ty. So this is another important part of who I am as an academic and as a Métis citizen, is that my children are being raised in a context, a Métis context, where they are proud of who they are and they're not afraid to say it, right? Especially when we come to so much prejudice when it comes to an anti-Indigenous prejudice, right? What's really wonderful is Amber Paquette, who's on this call, was in a talk with Edmund and his school, and he was so proud to tell me, and I was like, yeah, that's my friend, and he was like, oh my God. So it's really fun to see that coming through, right? So another aspect of Métis identity that's super important is this religious aspect. When you saw in that painting, this is the church at Batoche, which is called Saint Antoine de Padua. And then this is the shrine here at Saint-Laurent, right? So there's this religious aspect that's so central to who it means to be Métis. This here was gifted to the Oblates who quote unquote started the missionary by it was Rosalie Lepine. So it was this really famous Métis named Charles Nolan's wife, Rosalie Lepine, got a miraculous healing at this spot, which was a buffalo hunting wintering spot. So they became a pilgrimage site, a site for us to visit and meet. And for me growing up, this was the place where I was totally like into it. I could totally see the social connections and like all of the sort of peoplehood aspects of what religion meant was happening in this spot, right? And for me, ever since I grew up, since I was a kid, I've always wanted to go back. And this is my journey, going back to this pilgrimage spot where my family came together to visit, where other peoples came to like do religion, but also to visit, in all of these aspects, right? But religion is always a really difficult thing when it comes to the church, right? To church power. And this is what I'm going to sort of get into here. So here's my credentials if everyone cares about this. I did a lot of time at Concordia, and I focused on women in religion and Jewish studies for my degree. And for me, it's like I tried to do anthropology, and I did a freaking degree in social anthropology, but I couldn't find myself in that space. It was always about culture, and it was always about Indigenous culture as defined in First Nations terms, right? But Métis never fit that place, and it really had to do. This is that long journey to understand and unpack the racialization of Métis indigeneity. So I ended up going into religion because I found religion was a lot more fun and a lot easier to like unpack my aspects of Métis identity when I was talking to other people studying religion. We could just talk about the same topic or same kind of thing in different ways. So it was really interdisciplinary, and I really loved it, right? And I ended up doing Jewish studies because I found that Jewish studies was like, in retrospect, I think I was trying to understand Métis studies through Jewish studies, which is really weird, but it actually works because in Jewish studies, it's about studying yourself, right? And about studying what's like, what Jewish like identity, Jewish epistemologies, Jewish ways of thinking and being. And for me, that's what I wanted to do as a Métis studies person. And then I ended up doing a PhD in Canadian studies and religious studies at Ottawa, with a focus on identity. So essentially my road was always about coming back to what it means to be a Métis Catholic and what it means to be, what is this thing going on, right? Which is very difficult. And this is why I'm doing this presentation, because Métis have been Catholics a long time. You know, like this is the Métis on the buffalo hunt, so a lot of specific things. Métis Red River carts are really emblematic of Métis identity. But on these hunts, they would bring these like priests along with them, these missionaries, and they would do like, the rules of the hunt had very strict Catholic rules to them. Like they would say the rosary every night in Latin, and you know, I'm not a historian, so, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, Amber. They would also do they would do mass out on the prairies and on the plains, and they would follow Sabbath rules, so they wouldn't hunt on Sabbath. So all of these specific rules around being Catholic and being strongly Catholic. And it's like, you're trying to understand this. Like, this is just one element of an overall thing. But what is interesting is that when we look at this, we always focus on the Oblate missionaries, and we always focus on religious institutions and how they're impacting Indigenous people, right? So here's a picture of Oblates in the 19th century at Lac Saint Anne. And it's a really interesting idea because in the discourse, when I'm trying to understand this question of what it means to be Métis and Métis to be religion, I have this idea that Catholics, Oblates, they grow missions. Right? They go out into the Western Canada and they grow a mission. But I'm always like, if you could see my cursor, this guy here does not look like he's very happy about growing a mission at all. This guy looks a little bit happier. I think this is very emblematic of the Oblate experience out in the prairies, you know, amongst Indigenous peoples, right? But it's always focused on Oblate actions and their deeds and their heroic deeds. And the Métis are constantly in there on the sides, right? So for me, it was always struggling, and I always struggled to unpack that institutional focus, right? And this is about my identity too. Like, where do I stand in relationship to the institutions of this long-standing religion that informed so many Métis, right? So it really comes to this racialization, and this is the sort of message that has been sort of like imposed on us when it comes to identity, right? And this is a bit of what this sort of how history informs our contemporary idea. This is a picture I took of this sort of moralistic chart that was like hanging in Batoche in the presbytery about like, you follow this road, you be a good man, you work hard, and you'll be a good old man, and your family will be there, and your wife will like bring you your grandchild or whatever. And then in this other one where you drink and you like hang out with your buddies and your uncles and you end up like domestic abuse, and then you end up in this sort of dichotomy of immorality, right? So this is the kind of moral projection that the Oblates have on the Métis And this is the Métis experience. This is in Batoche, right? So this notion that religion, these are all identity markers that the Métis had to contend with in the 19th and also today, right? It's either you're Catholic or Protestant, you're French or you're English, you are a farmer. And this is like part of like, you have an occupation which you hold for your whole life, and you are owning land, you're sedentary, right? So it becomes this sort of like discourse of how identity is linked to race, right? And constructed in this way. And this is something that I've spent my whole life trying to unpack. I spent my master's degree and like trying to unpack that sort of racialization around French Canadian identity specifically, right? Because I'm from a French Canadian family, right? As well as Métis. So it really, this kind of moral framework here really informed this missionary ambivalence, and you could read it in the text, and you could see it affecting our ancestors, right? That the Métis were never good enough, right? And this is the baseline. It's like, holy crow, that's true. Like the Métis, no matter how good Catholics they were always bad Catholics, right? Because they were never white enough, right? Within a oblate sort of understanding racialization. So in this long story of me trying to figure out what's going on in my own past and my own, identity and stuff, I turned to like religious studies offered this really great gem around lived religion, right? Which is a theory that I found very helpful to unpack how institutions like Catholicism often have these systems and ways in which that the laity, people who are not priests or cardinals or bishops or hierarchy or professionals, can still encounter and engage in religious institutions, right? So for me, this was really an important aspect of how I could understand how the Métis were interpreting and promoting meaning inside and within relationship to the Catholic Church, right? And the second big concept that really helps me is in Native studies and its relationality. Though this is a strong and very dominant ethos and concept or theory in which relations mean everything, right? That everything that Indigenous people do has to do with relationality, right? So if we're studying, if we're engaging in religion, anything of these things always is framed or like sort of understood by in terms of relations, right? So the Métis for me in terms of religion is always that relations meant everything, right? So with peoples, other peoples, and more than human peoples, right? So just a breakdown then in which to like unpack this thing, and this kind of getting to the end, so don't worry about it, is that I started to realize, and this really helps me as a Métis citizen, is to unpack the difference between a Western and let's say a Métis perspective in relationship to institutionalization and in operation of relationality, right? So in terms of the Métis, the religious experience of Métis for institutions, it's institutions are the basic premise for organizing society. And you see that with banks, with like political organizations, with governance and religious institutions, that the institution is what people are working their way to, right? Whereas Métis, it's the basic premise of organizing society is relations. And that's a really important like sort of understanding for me to grasp onto. So in Western perspectives, privileging settler colonial values of individualism, hierarchy, and structure are really like a dominant part of how we see things in Western perspectives, whereas we privilege relational values of community, reciprocity, and consensus. This idea of racialization, sort of seeing the value to understand identity. What are my bloodlines? DNA often comes into play when we talk about indigeneity. And if you want to read about that, read Kim Tallbear's work, my colleague Kim Tallbear, she's amazing. Whereas us, it's about community-based recognition. Who is your circle of relations? Who do you claim and who claims you, right? So these are basic premises in which to understand indigeneity. It's not about who you are related to, but who are you relating to, right? Super important. And then Métis religion. So, this is this column here, is that Métis religion is this syncretism of Christian religion and native spirituality. Whereas in reality, and this is the really big thing that blew my brains away, is that Métis religion is this religio-spiritual practice that maximizes benefits to one's relations. So it's this idea that if we center Métis experiences of religion on relationality, we have this sort of bundle of how Métis do religion. And it's been a really sort of a big learning point for me, engaging and understanding who I am and how I am going to relate to the world in a religious way, right? Or a religious and spiritual religious way. So this, just a little self-promotion, this sort of ideas and stuff has been, we're publishing it in a chapter that I titled Mary and the Métis, Religion as a Site for New Insight in Métis Studies. And it's coming on this really awesome book done by my boss, Chris Anderson, and a colleague, Jennifer Adise, called A People and a Nation, New Directions in Contemporary Métis Studies. And it's sort of, this is the premise in which, this is where I'm at with this concept of relational religion, right? And I hope that you can read this one day. It's going to come out in March, but it's going to be an amazing book, right? So some final words just to leave you on here. We have like 15 minutes. Just to leave you with these ideas and how to unpack Métis, but also Indigenous, broader Indigenous, First Nations and Inuit understandings of experiences of religion, right? Religion as relations means honoring self-determination and of collective identity. So that is an important concept and understanding when it comes to relations, right? It's not about just who I am and how I am seeing the world. It's about my collective engagement, right? So then religion affects that, or it works through there, right? Indigenous engagement with white institutions does not mean assimilation. And that's a big sort of concept to understand, because we always see it as like, Coca-Cola will like globalize the world and everyone drinks Coke, they become like Americans, right? But it's just, that's kind of like a misnomer of settler colonialism, that Indigenous people are engaging and relating to white institutions all the time, and they're not losing themselves. We're not losing ourselves or our collective identity. It's only when there's a coercion against our collective identity that we start to fragment our relations, right? So again, it comes back to relations, which is a really amazing concept, a way of feeling and thinking through this. Indigenous peoples make relations everywhere and with everyone, with humans and more than humans, right? So a really important part, with rivers, with rocks, with storied places, right? Like Kanyen'kehá:ka, like Montreal, like Ottawa, like Edmonton. All these places are storied places in which Indigenous people have relations, right? So center relationality, sociopolitical sovereignty, and nationhood, peoplehood. That's been a really important aspect of how I interpret my Métis experiences of religion. And the last one is that Métis religion, this is a really good one, because every time I mention this to Métis, they always get really fired up, is that religion works for us and our relations, not the other way around, right? Which is really fantastic. And I think this is a Batoche battle flag that flew over the Métis resistance of 1885, which was done by the women of Batoche, which has, in French, c'est des maisons, des hôtels, surtout liberté. So houses, altars, so like Catholic altars, like you saw on that picture, but also liberty, right? So for us, this is a resistance to settler colonialism and to the imposition against our relations. And I love this flag because it really shows the Métis spirit of resistance as much as like any other Indigenous nation that lives with Canada inside and on Turtle Island, you could say, right? So for me, it's about collectivity and engagement with good relations, right? So very intense talk that I did really quickly. So I hope that it wasn't too intense for y'all. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Wow. Okay. Thanks, Paul. Yes.
I can't talk normally. I'm sorry.
So you answered hard. That's amazing. And the good news is there's not a quiz at the end of this.
Yeah.
It really is a conversation. I guess a quiz is how we live our lives, and the test, I would always say, for all of us is how we find our true selves in our own terms and are inspired by you. But that's more of a kind of grander outlook than a test. But there was lots in there, and so I just want to give people, and thank you for that, because it is rich. And as we were preparing for this, he said there's so much, and I think,
yes.
There's so much to learn. And I think for us, many of us who live further east of you, some of it may also be quite new. So, but we do have some time, and we sort of schedule it from 2 to 3, but we often go till 3:15 or however long. So, but I do want to invite people to ask questions, make comments. So if you and they can either be a specific a question to understand something deeper or reflection on that journey. So if you have a comment, a thought, a question, like maybe either raise your hand or use the raise hands function, and then I will recognize you. And then.
Oh, can I say before?
Please.
My parting gift from chaplaincy was this cup, so I took it out for you, Ellie, and I drink from it all the time, and I think about you.
What does it say? Is it a damned if you do?
It says,
damned if you don't?
It says, yeah, damned if you do or damned if you don't. Come on. It's either one or the other.
Oh, yeah, we gave you that?
Yes, and it was one of your most favorite cups.
I have
Sorry.
Oh, it was probably in the kitchen. There we go.
Yep.
Awesome.
Thank you. I love you guys.
Okay. I don't know what to say to that. Good memories. So,
good memories.
Yeah. So I'll just give you
Bob.
a minute. And, yeah.
Yeah. I have a question about the flag. Actually, both of them, because one, at least in Western terms, looks like it has an infinity symbol on it.
The Métis flag, yeah?
Yes, that's one. And is it an infinity symbol, or is it have different meaning in Indigenous terms? And two is the elements that are on the battle flag, the raised hand, and I'm guessing a wolf.
Yeah.
But the ears didn't look particularly vulpine, so I'm not sure.
Yeah. So let me show it to you again. Oh, well, you guys all see it, eh? Anyways. Yeah. So can I also invite Amber to talk to this too, because I'm not a historian, but like, and Amber talks about Métis history all the time. Amber, do you want to say something?
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to. So the infinity symbol origins are a little, I don't know, they're debated. But I've heard, I guess there's two definitive stories on that. So there's the one that when the Métis would go on their battle hunts or their buffalo hunts, they often would send out scouts, and those scouts, when they were on the plains, when they would see something on the plains, they would ride their horses in a figure eight. If you've ever ridden a horse, you don't ride your horse in a circle. They get really
barf.
So there's that. Of course, there's also what I've heard is that the infinity symbol kind of represents those two nations coming together in unison. But being a historian, I like the historical origins. There's also the red flag as well, which is more of the battle flag too. But I've actually never seen the Batoche battle flag until now, so that was really exciting. Yeah, I'd never seen it before.
I made it into a vanity plate for my car, which is really awesome. Yes. So the plate really, so it's about like Métis resistance in Batoche. And the hand is like this idea of stop, like stop in your tracks. And the wolf really has to do with like, with the wolf's spirit, I guess. But in this book, she talks about, which is a really good book. I haven't read it all yet. It's by Jean Taillé, who's a famous Métis historian. She talks about the Batoche battle flag and about the wolf, right? So I have to get to that very soon. Anyways, read this book; it's really good. But what I love about it is has the sort of like that the church altar is at the center of Métis resistance, and that's something that you don't even think about anymore. We always think about the Catholic Church as this really oppressive structure on all Indigenous peoples, right? So it's just like, wow. So how do I make amends with that understanding or that notion of Catholic resistance in the center of Métis identity, which is super exciting, right? So,
I like the bottom, the surtout, liberté, above all, liberty.
Yeah, liberty for our
freedom.
Relations.
And
that's right.
I like that.
Yeah, I'll get you a vanity plate, Bob.
Ellen had her hand up as well.
Thanks, Amber. You rock.
Helen, please go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. Lots of comments, basically. I don't have any particular question, but listening to you speak and watching that presentation, your description of like coming home, that was me in this moment right now. Like such a relief, actually. Okay, so yeah, because currently I'm in the master's program of religion and cultures at Conversation But my background, so my undergraduate is in First Nation Studies from UBC. And then
Whoa.
I did most of a master's program at the University of Tromsø in Northern Norway in Indigenous Studies.
Jesus.
Yeah. So,
Holy.
in my academic background, I always found it quite sort of like Métis-ness there was always the gap in what we were taught. And I loved my program at UBC, but there was a real move away from, I remember one teacher of mine, and this was kind of disheartening, and she apologized for this later, but she talked
Tell
about
me.
how, pardon?
Tell me. I'm just
Okay.
listening.
She told
Actively
me that,
listening.
She told me that it was not in like Indigenous studies' best interest to study hybridity anymore.
Yeah.
That had been kind of like, that it had been overdone, and it had led to this path of people like appropriating Indigenous identity. So it was kind of like for the betterment of the program that any aspect of hybridity was going to be sidelined for a bit, which was hard to hear when that was my identity, basically. And my mother is from Brazil also, so there was an added element of that. But yeah, so that was sort of my experience in Indigenous studies, super positive for the most part, but I think we had one Métis speaker in the entire 6 years that I was at in that First Nation Studies program. And so, like you said, with religious studies, that kind of allowed a bit more freedom to be able to discuss some things without additional weird colonial shame of like, I don't know. Yeah. I found that when I was doing my last master's program, I did it with my supervisor was in religious studies. And he was really into the idea of, he was really interested in new religious movements, particularly Indigenous people and their new religions that they were creating. And so that kind of swung my interest back to Louis Riel. Which again, I had a negative experience where I brought up being Catholic to another Métis professor even, and she was like, oh, people talk about like Riel's crazy Catholicism too much. I was like, oh,
so true.
That's how I know how to be Métis. Every single Métis person I grew up with, I knew from Catholic school and the Catholic Church. And so, so I'm getting emotional, but it was emotional hearing you talk about it. It's so, it feels like coming home. So
Heart, hands.
So much.
Well, you're welcome to come do a PhD with me in
holy shit, right? It's only 6 hours away. That's the closest university I've ever been to.
Exactly. Talk about northern relations here. It's just like, no problem. But I must say, thank you so much, Ellen. I was watching you in the side. You were laughing and smiling a lot, so that made me feel really good. But you're absolutely right. Like religion has not been unpacked. It's always been about hybridity, syncretism, and never about peoplehood. And I feel like being in Native studies has really helped me conceptualize things differently. That lands a lot better in my community. So when I speak to Métis, like when I speak into community, everyone's like vibrating. They just love it so much, and all the old ladies and are like, yes, So I'm like, So I know I'm doing good community Indigenous research, right? When that happens. So I'm really happy and honored that you're here to listen. You bet. Thanks, Merci.
Renee.
Yeah, go.
So I just wanted to share something of my own personal experience, which is not from a Métis background or Catholicism, but there was just points of resonance and gave me some language for things. And so I come from a very, I would say, patriarchal and definitely colonial Protestant religious background in evangelical Christianity. And what's been interesting for me in my own journey of really a changing of theology, like my theology has changed and it changed because of my relations with people and my how does this theology that I've been given, how does it affect the people that I'm in relationship with, specifically my children, just this idea of like where you were talking about I don't have all the language. I don't have the academic language. Okay.
That's fine. Yeah, don't worry about it.
But this idea of the focus on relations, and I've gone through my own process of like deconstructing my faith really, and kind of seeing it differently and rebuilding it in a different way, where it was about how does this idea that I used to believe about God or institutional religion or whatever, how does that impact the people I'm in relationship with? Is that okay for me? Like, as in, like, if I carry that through to how this impacts my child, whatever this belief is that I've inherited, is that really okay for me? And it turned out it wasn't okay. And so it was just like, I went through my own theological shift and my own religious shift because of relations. Mm-hmm. So it was just, and I see parts of what you're saying, and I'm like, oh man, I wish that was my my background or what I had been, but it's just, I guess I have to forge that for myself in my own religious spaces.
Yeah. And I think it's true, like, when it comes, I studied Catholic evangelicals in my PhD, right, about evangelical youth and political identity. Yeah. So evangelicalism also has this really interesting like relationship with Indigenous peoples, right? And it's problematic right now because there's so much like sort of a settled colonial ideology being operationalized in community, right? But we can never take that for face value. We always have to go to community and see how people are doing things collectively. So, and this is the same thing for like, this is something that me and my PhD student, who is Mi'kmaq, and she's looking at Mi'kmaq women's relationships to Catholicism in Mi'kmaqi. And she's constantly also negotiating the evangelical life that she grew up with. And what does that mean to community? What does that mean to collectivity and engagement? So for me, it's like always frame it around relations and see how communities are struggling with or working with these ideas and these things that are that are coming into relationship with, right? So again, relations are super important to how we understand and see Indigenous engagement, right? So yeah, cool.
I just have to say goodbye because I have to jump to the meeting, but I just wanted to say thank you so much, Paul, and everyone. It was just a really great talk, and I just love hearing, our history. It's just, it always fires me up, and it's what I so thank you.
Thanks, Amber, for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Amber. And I think Suzanne had her hand up. Is that right? Yeah, go ahead.
I do. And I just hope my husband in the background understands I'm on a Zoom call and doesn't start unloading the dishwasher really loud.
Like my wife is
all understand.
Yes.
The relationship piece of your talk just really resonated deeply with everything. Nice. This morning I work at Camosun College as an Indigenous advisor. I work frontline with 1,200 Indigenous students a year. It's such a privilege that I get to build relationships with students. I get to support them. I get to help them figure out how to build relationships that are going to help them be successful as they move into being adults. And many of them are adults. I shouldn't say it like that.
Of course.
Well, we have never had so many 17-year-olds as we do this year. So yeah, because once they graduate high school, they can come to college. And when I started doing this job 19 years ago, vast majority of our students were 35 plus, and now the vast majority are babies. And anyway, sidebar. I was talking to a faculty this morning, and she mentioned something about, you seem to stop and talk to people a lot during work hours. And I was like, yes, unscheduled networking opportunities. Yep. And she kind of looked at me and I said, I know it sounds flippant, but actually it's building relationships. Actually, what we're doing right now, having this conversation, is building a relationship, which means the work that we end up doing for students is going to be richer and deeper and more meaningful, especially if that student comes to us in a crisis and needs some outside the box thinking and support. It's the relationship that's going to make that miracle happen for them. They're going to perceive it as a miracle. We're just going to go like this on our keyboards. And so relationship is everything. And if we don't have that in place, we don't really have anything.
Exactly.
So I loved this part of your talk. I was sitting here with
Right
my
on.
phone taking pictures of all your students.
Did you? I'll send you the PDF, man.
Did. Like, just in
that's
case,
cool.
I better, click.
Yeah.
Anyway,
And
it's wonderful.
it's so funny to come from a faculty of Native Studies where we implicitly understand that at everything we do. We do everything around relations and visiting, right? But it's like I feel a lot of my colleagues and students who are Indigenous in the University of Alberta, they face a lot of structural racism when it comes to visiting, where they are not allowed to do that relational work, which is foundational to how we get things done.
Yeah.
So God, and this is part of normal settler society. It's just like focus on your thing. Do it on your own. Do it by yourself. Get it done, and you'll be rewarded, right? Whereas, like, I don't want to do things by myself anymore. So I'm actively working with my students all the time. I'm part of this big research project on Lac St. Anne and this kinscapes work that I'm doing with a bunch of Métis women. Women are always the people who are always there, which is really amazing. I constantly work with women all the time, and it's just like women know how to do good relations, and I'm so grateful for that, right? And so I'm like, yeah. When we think about institutional problems, think about those aspects where collectivity gets pushed out, right? Recognition gets pushed out, and I feel like that's a really good way of unpacking decolonization. Mm-hmm. Right on. Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Vicky.
Welcome, Vicky. Glad you came.
I'm so sorry I missed this. I had another thing that I needed to support the students in. But you're speaking my language there, Paul.
Oh, so, yeah.
Vicky Baldo at Tansei Kwesego Weche. I work at the Aboriginal Student Resource Center here at Concordia, supporting the students. And I'm Cree Métis and an adoptee from the 60s. So I know Suzanne, and it's great to see some of the students here as well. And Ellie and her team, all the great work they do. So I'm really sorry I missed what you had to say, but it's
all on tape.
Recorded.
You bet.
It's recorded, Vicky. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So Paul, I have
thanks
a
for
question.
Coming.
Yeah, thanks everyone for being here. And I have a question for you. In some way, like, we just, I think at the MFSC we're very fortunate that people tell us their stories, and so thank you for that. And thanks for the stories that others have been telling, and the relationship building that we even in a short time engage with in a small scale. But I have a question about the spirituality. I have to, as a chaplain. But I'm just curious about any reflections you have on, has your either your spiritual life, I know those are big words, but how even your everyday life and sort of the way you center yourself, you ground yourself, how has that changed as you were sort of became firmer and clearer in your identity?
Holy, that's a big question. I'm so happy to be here. I never talk about this. Yay! It's so much fun. I think so. This is so awesome because we never talk about that sort of personal aspect. And I've gone down a very long road to unpack my religious identity. My mom is French Canadian and very French Canadian. She's part of this, a very sort of like institutional religious engagement, and which is part of my undergrad, my master's in undergrad was unpacking women power and Catholic identity and French Canadian identity, right? And just so I can understand that aspect. But I've always and it's so funny that's my mother's side of understanding the world and understanding religion, understanding Catholicism. But my father constantly had this really amazing sort of quiet religiosity, which was he constantly prayed and talked with his ancestors, our ancestors, constantly. He was like so many Métis, these genealogy freaks, and it's not about like this genealogy like this, but it's this genealogy like this, right? And he prayed to all of these people all the time, and he talked to me about it all the time. He knew everyone's birthday and knew everyone's relations, and I was just like in awe of that. And this is what I've been trying to unpack all this time, is that for me, religion is about visiting. Really, it's my religion. And for me, contemplating my ancestors constantly is my religion. I constantly think about my Métis relations, and then those relations who are not Métis as much as I can. And that's where I'm focusing all of my attention on, is making good relations through those acts of engagement with visiting and gift giving and reciprocity, right? And I think this has some resonance with so many other non-Métis people, Cree or like other First Nations or Inuit, that like these relations are super important. So they are part of my spiritual aspect, right? So that instead of focusing so much of my attention and spirit on the institution of the church, I'm looking at how I'm always focusing and lifting up my nation, and those relations of the nation, right? Like my Cree relations are super important to me because that's where I grew up, right? The Métis are part of what they call the Iron Alliance, which is it's called Naheopoat. So it's like Ojibwe and Plains Cree and Northern Cree. So like these are important people to us, right, as Métis. So, and then every situation has these places. So I'm constantly praying to these relations all the time. So that's where, and then I just use that kind of, that's where my center is. And it fills me up so much. So my wife is Vietnamese Chinese, and we do have a form of ancestor worship where we feed the ancestors all the time. And I'm like, that's my religion. No problem. I love this. Like I'll do this all day long, like praying and like using incense and feeding my ancestors all the time. It's fantastic, So yeah, so we get along really well like that, even though it's like totally cross-cultural, but it's like we share these same values. And we've been together since like 1998. So it's like we're the same person now. So essentially, without owning each other, okay? She's her own person. So
I won't get involved in the relationship. George Wright or Ganawagi, welcome, George, says, it is not the experience of the Mohawks of Ganawagi in relation to the Church of Religion. And so I think it is important to learn about that, if I may say that each Indigenous group and area and has different experiences, and so I think it's really important to honor that and learn about it too.
And also know that this isn't an apology for Catholicism or anything, right? The Métis have, like I said in the presentation, have faced so much structural racism when it comes to the church, right? And so do the Mi'kma'ki, so the Mi'kmaq, like all these. It's about sovereign relations. Really, that's my most important thing. Because you can ask any Métis and they'll be like, yeah, my grandmother, she has a whole altar full of stuff, of Métis stuff, but they hate the church. There's this priest who like they hate back in 1956 and they'll never go back, So it's like, that's the kind of unpacking power that's super important to understand and engage in too. Yeah.
So I know some people are signing off because it is after 3:00. So maybe we'll just go another couple of minutes and then we'll officially close it. I know in all those cafes, we sort of scratched the topic. I mean, you teach classes, people are doing their PhD in what you're talking about. So for us to do this in in an hour and 45 minutes is kind of ludicrous on one hand, but on the other hand, it's intense if nothing else.
I'm sweating here.
But I hope Ashley and I, who run the cafes, and we are the people who get different guests together with the rest of the team. Just a sec, Suzanne. We try to have interesting conversations that make us think and reflect. So I hope that people either take something with that to reflect on their own identity, to reflect on how we each are engaged in relation building, and maybe also or sort of the hope to learn something. Maybe we take away from it just to figure out how to pronounce the Indigenous word for the territory we're on. So all of those are, if we sort of take something away from this thing, then I think then it was, I don't want to say worthwhile, but then, I think as hosts and presenters, then I feel it was a good way to spend our time in community today. So Suzanne, I think you had your hand up, did you?
I do. I have a little question. Yep. Paul, are you familiar with voodoo?
Yes.
Okay.
As much as I can.
not the pin poking kind.
Yeah.
Would you say that the path of the blend of Catholicism and Vodun is similar to the path of Catholicism and what for Métis people? That's my question.
So I guess the better, so that's a good question, because it's about like, how do Indigenous people engage in white structures of religion, right? Like, and sometimes we could see it as syncretic, but that's very much a settler sort of like a Western perspective. Mm-hmm. So for me, I'd rather unpack syncretism as being, how are relations defining and shaping religion, right? So with Vodouin, it's about relations, I guess. But so I can't speak to that particularly because I don't know much about like about that culture and stuff. But my biggest hurdle has always been to unpack Métis syncretism. So because it's always been like, oh well, because the Oblates had always used it to demean us for whatever traditional way we were doing things, right? So that's why I find operationalizing relationality as Métis experience of religion so much better, because it's really about how we do our relations. Like if we're engaging in traditional ways of religion, of traditional Indigenous or First Nations practices, it's because we inherited that or we made relations to it because of our aunties or moms or brothers or sisters. You know, like what do we inherit as a people? And what do we inherit, each of us, in our communities, in our collectivities, right? So it's less about me appropriating or being sort of like proselytized or converted, but more me making relations with things. Like for the Métis, the fiddle, you know? Like, or the sash, for example. Like I have a sash here, right? I have a black sash and then a sash from the Gabriel Dumont Institute that I was gifted. And they're super important to me. But it's like for French Canadians or for Quebecois, they'll say, oh, that's ours or whatever. That's something that you guys, stole or whatever, appropriated. But the Métis made strong relations with it and turned it with the way we wanted to do it, right? We made it ours. The fiddle, we made it ours. And it has sort of family resemblances with our ancestors, but it's still ours as a collective thing, right? So for me, that's what we need to have, that same conversation about michif, about the fiddle, about our dancing, and about our beating, that we have to do with religion too. And that's a harder thing because there's so much power invested on religion. You know what I mean? So that's why it's so difficult to talk about, especially in Indigenous terms, because there's so much settler colonial ideology invested in this.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Wow, I have a feeling we could talk for another 2 hours, but I actually...
Yeah, my God, it's so much fun.
Great. I actually do want to bring this to a close, not an end, but a close. And really, first of all, thank you very much, Paul. I've learned so much. I really had a chance to reflect. There were lots of thanks in the chat.
Yeah, Rupert and Belinda.
Yeah, and also I'm thrilled to see so many people. We have Matthew's still there, but he's joining us from England today. We have people from the West, so I'm just really grateful for that collection of folks from all over this beautiful world. And so, I just want to end by saying it will be recorded. And I also, Paul, if you could send me the presentation, I would be pleased to forward it to others.
You bet. Vicky,
acknowledgement. Yeah. We've recorded it, so I know who's there. And if you don't get it by the end of the week, just email me. But I really want to thank you for both doing the academic and the presentation of the knowledge base, but also the sharing of your personal journey and personal reflections, which I think is really both are what encourages me to continue in my own journey and reflect on who I am and how I relate to others. So and as an ending, we often just sort of end by saying something we take with us. So maybe, and I encourage you to just say one word or one phrase of something that you take with you from this talk as we close this Conversation Café. So who wants to go? Just sort of shout it out, not shout it, but say it.
Yeah, don't shout. You do what you want.
Just take a moment to think.
Bye, Brittany.
I just
Thank you, Brittany.
I just wanted to say thank you, like the whole presentation, but one point, just that idea of Métis reading of culture, sort of the idea of like what you said you inherited from Jewish studies of looking at a holistic, how seeing from one culture can sort of give you a view elsewhere. But yeah, I like this idea of like a sort of Métis reading, and I'm excited to read your chapter in the upcoming book too. So
Yay.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Mark. Right on. Thanks, Renee.
I'll go because I have to leave soon right away too. And this might seem obvious, but I'm taking it. The word that I'm taking with me is relations. And in so many ways, I feel like I've made relations here now today. So thank you. Thank you. Especially thank you, Paul, but thank you everyone for creating this space. It just feels so validating and lovely to be here. Especially now that you've all heard a little bit about myself and seen me cry. So,
yay! Crying is good. Nice to meet you, Ellen. Thank you so much. I'll see you in a few years, eh?
Thanks for coming, Ellen. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll go. The big thing, well, I took away a lot of things, but the one thing that really made my eyes go big was the term more than humans.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how that takes humanity away from some apex, yes, I just love it.
Good, eh?
Use that.
So not other than humans, but more than humans, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you for your questions too, eh? Let's talk, eh?
Sure thing.
Yeah. All right. Anyone else who wants to say something?
Well, I'm just going to say I look forward to hearing that recording, Ellie.
Yeah, I'll make sure I'll send it to you, Vicky.
Yeah. And maybe we'll get you back again, Paul, and we'll do something through the center with the students. And I know there was an overlap with some things and people that really did express interest in this. But hey, we're in this virtual world, right? We're learning. Yeah. So what stuck with me in the short time I was there and something, I guess you just confirmed for me, because that's what I do, especially as that adoptee. My whole journey, my healing journey has been about reconnection. And when I think of the genealogy and the roots and you know, that's what it does. It's not.
It's like this.
Yeah. So much so yeah.
Good job. Thank you, Vicky. Thanks for coming. I would love to have an opportunity to come back and do just maybe talk about relations again, and not do a PowerPoint presentation, but talk together, right? Like, so yeah. Okay.
So just to let you know, we do a Conversation Café. This has been the last one of the term, but we're starting again in January. January 19 is actually, the first one is on music, a kind of a drum circle, a community drumming. And so, and then we'll have guests after that. We're just thinking of guests and inviting people or asking folks. So if you know someone who would be of interest, or Paul, if you want to come back, or if you have something you feel passionate about either learning or presenting, talk to Ashley or I. So,
yeah, perfect.
Yeah. And all right. So we're losing people rapidly. Brittany, yes, you had your hand up.
Oh, I was just going to say, Paul, thank you for your articulation. Sometimes explaining kind of this lived experiences becomes very abstract when you don't know exactly what you're trying to say, but you know the experience, you know the feeling, but just trying to like explain the idea of relations is sometimes the fact that it's ingrained into everything sometimes comes up as like a confusing note. But thank you for for that comparison. I think that was really wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for joining us, Brittany. I really appreciate your background and your presence and your little ball of string. I just love it because I feel like I'm doing the same thing. You're working.
I'm working on a project, so I'm trying to ball yarn.
I love it.
Love it.
You know, Mom and Grandma wouldn't want me to keep busy, so I got to do it.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. It's a prayer.
It is. All right. I think we're going to sign off unless someone else wants to say something. Going to give last. So thank you very much, Paul. It's been a real pleasure.
Cool.
Great to reconnect with you, and great to see everyone. Thank you for coming, and thanks for doing what you do in your piece of the world. So thank you, and be well.
Thank you very much for everyone, eh? Marcia, bye.